Pima County receiving some 4,000 calls just in the last 24 hours. That totals up to about 18,000 of calls they've received, potentially trying to assist some of the public in this. And FBI on the ground there is potentially looking into new leads around this as they're canvassing the area.
87 days. That is how long Nancy Guthrie has been missing. 87 days of silence. 87 days of unanswered questions. 87 days of a family waiting by a phone that never rings with the answer they need. And in all of that time, not a single named suspect. Not a confirmed motive, not one public statement from investigators that tells the world they know who walked into that house in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona, in the early hours of February 1st, and walked back out with a 70-year-old woman who had done nothing to deserve what happened to her. That is what the public sees. But Brian Entin sees something different. Entin has been closer to this investigation than almost any reporter in the country. He has tracked every development, spoken to sources inside and outside law enforcement, and watched this case evolve in ways that the headlines have never fully captured. And now, on day 87, he is asking a question out loud that changes the entire shape of this story. What if the FBI already knows who took Nancy Guthrie? Not suspects it, not has a theory about it, knows it. What if the silence that has frustrated the public for nearly 3 months is not confusion, not failure, not an investigation spinning in circles, but something far more deliberate? What if every measured statement, every withheld detail, every carefully worded non-answer from federal investigators is not the sound of people who do not know, but the sound of people who do, and are protecting exactly what they know until the moment it can be used in a courtroom? Hi viewers, here is a question and the answer is simpler than you think. Do you believe the FBI already knows who took Nancy Guthrie but is staying quiet to protect the case? Drop your answer in the comments right now. Yes or no. That is all it takes. Because that question is not just a talking point. It is the axis around which this entire investigation turns. Here is what is known. Nancy Guthrie was dropped off at her home in the Catalina foothills area of Tucson, Arizona at approximately 9:50 in the evening on January 31st. The following morning, she did not appear for a scheduled church live stream. When family members arrived at her house around 11 in the morning and found no sign of her, they called 911 at noon. What investigators found when they arrived was not the scene of someone who simply walked away. Her phone was still inside the house. Her medication was still inside the house. Her shoes were still inside the house. The back doors had been propped open. And on the front porch, blood. Tested. Confirmed as Nancy's DNA. Someone had been there. Someone who came in the dark, moved through that house, and left behind the one thing they could not take with them. Evidence.
And Andy, they say, I have tried to, this is them claiming here now, that they have tried to reach out to Savannah's brother and to her sister via email and text to no avail. And because of that, they said, I'm reaching out to you guys, and I am essentially selling the name of, again, the identity of the captor.
The doorbell camera was disconnected at 1:47 in the morning. At 2:12, motion was detected, but no footage was captured. At 2:28, Nancy's pacemaker stopped syncing with her Apple devices. 41 minutes. That is the entire window. Whoever did this had 41 minutes to get in, take her, and disappear. And they did it without triggering a single alarm, without leaving a clear image on camera, and without making a single mistake visible enough to produce a public arrest nearly 3 months later. That does not happen by accident. That level of precision, that specific knowledge of the camera, the timing, the layout of the home, the pacemaker's sync window, that is not the behavior of someone who stumbled into a crime. That is the behavior of someone who planned it. Someone who knew things about Nancy Guthrie's life that a stranger would have no reason to know.
So an hour and a half ago, we got kind of a bizarre letter, an email from somebody who says they know who the kidnapper is and that they have tried reaching Savannah's sister Annie and Savannah's brother to no avail.
And that is exactly what makes Brian Entin's question so significant. Because here is the thing about investigations that go quiet. There are two kinds of quiet. There is the quiet of an investigation that has run out of road. And there is the quiet of an investigation that has found the road and is moving down it carefully, in the dark, without headlights, so no one sees them coming. Those two kinds of quiet do not sound the same from the inside. One sounds like silence. The other sounds like preparation. And every person who has spent time inside the FBI, inside the machinery of how federal investigations actually work, will tell you the same thing. The Bureau does not hold press conferences when they are closing in. They hold press conferences when it is already done. Steve Moore spent 25 years inside that machine. He worked kidnapping cases. He understands how the FBI moves when it believes it is approaching the end of an investigation, and he is not someone who deals in speculation. He deals in pattern recognition. And the pattern he sees in this case is not the pattern of an investigation that has stalled. 10 days after Nancy was reported missing, the FBI released doorbell camera images to the public. A masked male, approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, carrying an Ozark Trail 25-liter backpack, a product sold exclusively at Walmart.
In Tucson, investigators faced a huge challenge trying to recover video from Nancy Guthrie's Nest camera that had been disconnected from the home's Wi-Fi. Officials were eventually able to access the footage through back-end systems.
A gun holster visible on his person, moving deliberately, not rushing, not looking around nervously, not making the kind of movements that suggest someone who was improvising. Deliberate. That word matters more than almost any other word in this case. Because deliberate implies knowledge, it implies that whoever that masked figure was, they had already run this through their mind before they ever set foot near that porch. They had already decided what they would do if something went wrong. They had already calculated the risk and determined it was manageable. That is not a crime of opportunity. That is a crime of calculation. Walmart records were subpoenaed in an attempt to trace the backpack. The public has not been told what came of that subpoena. And that silence, that specific silence about a specific piece of evidence from a specific store with specific purchasing records, is one of the many places in this investigation where the absence of information is itself a form of information. The FBI does not tell you what it has until it is ready to use it. And right now, it is not ready. Or more precisely, it is not done being ready. Because ready and done are two different things. And the distance between them, in a federal kidnapping investigation with this much evidence in motion, can look from the outside like nothing is happening at all. That is what Brian Entin is pushing back against. The assumption that silence means stagnation. The assumption that if something had broken open in this investigation, the public would know about it. The public would not know about it. That is not how this works. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 87 days. The investigation is active across the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the FBI, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and federal prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Tucson. Nearly 40,000 public tips have been received. The reward stands at $1.1 million. $1 million from the Guthrie family. $100,000 from the FBI. And somewhere in a laboratory, DNA collected from the scene of her disappearance is being processed through technology so advanced that it can build a suspect's family tree from microscopic biological material when there is no direct database match. That is not the infrastructure of a case that has gone cold. That is the infrastructure of a case that is almost ready to move. Brian Entin knows it, and now, the question he is asking out loud is the one that every investigator connected to this case is asking behind closed doors. How close are they? And what exactly do they already know? The ransom notes should not have gone to television stations. That is the first thing that does not fit. Real ransom operations do not want attention. They do not want cameras, reporters, or the kind of public scrutiny that comes with sending a demand letter to a newsroom. They want one thing. They want money. Quietly, quickly, without law enforcement turning the situation into a federal case before the first deadline even arrives. But that is not what happened here. Within days of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, ransom notes began arriving at media organizations. TMZ received one. 2 Tucson television stations received others. The notes demanded millions of dollars in Bitcoin. 2 deadlines were set, February 5th and February 9th. Both passed. No confirmed payment was made. No follow-up came from whoever sent the letters. No escalation. No new demand. No proof that Nancy was alive. Nothing. In a real ransom situation, that silence after a missed deadline would not be acceptable. The entire leverage a kidnapper holds depends on keeping the emotional pressure constant. Every hour that passes without the money moving is supposed to feel unbearable for the family. That is the mechanism. That is how it works. The kidnapper reminds the family what is at stake. They provide proof of life. They make the cost of non-compliance feel immediate and real. They do not go quiet.
Now I want to bring in TMZ founder Harvey Levin, okay? TMZ, remember, received the first ransom note from Guthrie's alleged kidnappers. We don't know if that's what it was, but Harvey has been very out front with what's been going on. And now I'm to understand that you believe or have reason to believe that
these people went quiet. They sent letters to television stations, set 2 deadlines that came and went without consequence, provided no proof that Nancy was alive, and then disappeared from public view entirely. That is not how someone who wants money behaves. That is how someone who wants something else behaves. And then came February 10th. The CBS Phoenix station, one of the stations that had received the original ransom letters, confirmed that activity appeared inside the Bitcoin wallet connected to those notes. A small transaction, and alongside it, a message. We are ready to talk. Contact us. With a link for how to reach out. No one officially confirmed who placed that message. But the behavioral fingerprint was unmistakable to anyone who has spent time inside a federal negotiation. This was not a payment. This was not a gesture of goodwill. This was a signal. Specifically, it was the FBI telling whoever was on the other side of that wallet that the dynamic of this situation was not going to be a one-way street. It was the Bureau establishing, in the clearest possible terms, that there would be no compliance without a conversation first. No money moving. No demands met in silence. No transaction happening outside of a structured, monitored, controlled negotiation. Steve Moore explained exactly what that message represented. When the FBI placed that note in the wallet, it was not reaching out from a position of desperation. It was doing the opposite. It was removing desperation from the equation entirely. It was saying, you do not set the terms here. We both have something to lose. We are both at the table whether you acknowledge it or not. That is control, not negotiation in the emotional sense. Control in the strategic sense. And then the other side said nothing. No counter message, no proof of life, no follow-up of any kind that became public. The channel that the FBI opened on February 10th was never used again. At least not in any way that the world was allowed to see. Think about what that means. If the people behind those ransom letters genuinely had Nancy Guthrie and genuinely wanted the money they demanded, the FBI opening a line of communication would have been exactly what they needed. It would have been the door they were waiting for. Instead, they walked away from it. They did not bite. And when someone opens a negotiation and the other side does not bite, it tells you something specific about what the other side actually wanted. It tells you that the negotiation was never the point. It tells you the letters, the Bitcoin wallet, the deadlines, the entire public-facing ransom apparatus was constructed for a reason that had nothing to do with collecting money. Savannah Guthrie said publicly that she believed 2 of the ransom notes were legitimate. That statement has weight. She is not someone who speaks carelessly about this case. And if 2 of those notes carried something authentic, something real, then the person or people who sent them made a deliberate choice to go public with a demand they apparently never intended to collect on. Why would someone do that? Steve Moore was direct about it. He called it negotiating in bad faith from day one. No proof of life. No demonstrated concern for Nancy's safety based on the physical evidence at the scene. Every action taken in a way that prioritized something other than the supposed goal of the operation. That pattern has a name in behavioral analysis. It is called a performance. And performances are not created for the performer. They are created for an audience. The question that has been sitting at the center of this investigation since February 10th is simple and devastating. If the ransom was never really about the money, then what was it about? And does the answer to that question lead directly to a name the FBI has been quietly building a case around for the last 87 days? Because here is what investigators do not say out loud until they are ready. They do not announce when a ransom stops looking like a ransom and starts looking like something else entirely. They do not hold press conferences to say the motive we have been investigating has shifted. They absorb that information. They redirect. They follow the new shape of the evidence wherever it leads. And then they go quiet. Exactly like they have been. The Bitcoin wallet has been silent since February 10th. The public communication from investigators has been measured and controlled. No named suspects. No confirmed direction. Just the steady, disciplined silence of people who are building towards something they are not yet ready to name. But the silence is not empty. It never was. What happened inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department in the year before Nancy Guthrie disappeared is not a footnote to this investigation.
NewsNation senior correspondent Brian Entin has been on top of this case from the very start. Brian, good afternoon. What is the significance of Nancy's front door?
Yeah, first of all, it's good news that they're making progress with the other cameras. Nick, we've reported on that. Of course, they had the camera from the front door. Now they also have it from the back. But look at this. This is interesting. A lot of people didn't...
It is one of the most consequential threads running through it. And it starts with 220 emails that most people covering this case have not fully connected to what happened on the night of January 31st. Fox 10 in Phoenix obtained those emails. They document an active communication between the Pima County Sheriff's Department and producers from a reality television crew working with the A&E network. The department was coordinating access, interviews with department heads, body camera footage, ride-alongs with deputies, the kind of access that requires trust between a production company and the people running a law enforcement agency. But buried inside those emails was a detail that should have raised every flag available. The department noted that it had experienced rotational reassignments in the year leading up to the production. The head of the homicide unit had been moved out. The head of the cold case unit had been moved out. Leadership positions that require years of specialized experience, positions that exist specifically to handle the most serious and complex investigations a department will ever face, had been emptied and refilled. And then Nancy Guthrie disappeared. The lead investigator assigned to her case had no prior homicide experience. Read that again slowly. The lead investigator on one of the highest-profile missing persons cases in the United States in 2026, a federal kidnapping case with DNA evidence, a ransom operation, and national media attention, had never worked a homicide before. That is not a personnel oversight. That is a structural failure with consequences that may never be fully calculated. Because investigative experience is not theoretical. It is not something you can compensate for with effort or enthusiasm. When you are standing inside a crime scene that has a 41-minute window, blood evidence, disconnected cameras, and microscopic trace material that degrades by the hour, you need someone who has stood in rooms like that before. Someone who knows what to prioritize. Someone who understands that every minute spent making the wrong decision is a minute you do not get back. And then the crime scene was released before investigators had finished processing it. In a case built on trace evidence, hair, skin cells, DNA transfer, biological material that exists in a space for hours before becoming unusable, releasing a scene early is not just a procedural error. It is potentially the difference between a prosecution that holds and a case that falls apart before it reaches a verdict. Because once a scene has been re-entered after release, anything collected afterward becomes legally contested. Defense attorneys challenge it. Chain of custody becomes a battlefield. Evidence that should have been definitive becomes arguable. Someone made that call, and that someone had a badge. But the failure that stands out most sharply to retired FBI agent Steve Moore is the hair sample. Evidence collected from Nancy's home, including a hair, was sent to a private laboratory in Florida. The Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed that. But here is what preceded that transfer. The FBI had requested that material over 2 months before they received it. 2 months. In a kidnapping investigation, the Bureau asked for the evidence, and instead of it going directly to the FBI's own laboratory, the most advanced forensic facility in the country, it was sent to a lab 3,000 miles away. Moore did not mince words about what that tells him. When a sheriff is making specific decisions about which laboratory receives specific pieces of evidence in a federal kidnapping case, it is not a management question anymore. It is an investigation question. It reflects something deeper than bureaucratic friction. It reflects a relationship between the sheriff and the FBI that has fractured in a way that could affect the outcome of the case itself. The Pima County Board of Supervisors voted unanimously to question Sheriff Chris Nanos about how the department has been managed. A recall effort against him is now underway. And then there is the detail that no one has been able to explain satisfactorily. Early in the investigation, Sheriff Nanos told investigators that he believed he knew the motive behind Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. He has not shared that motive publicly. Not once. Not in any press conference, not in any statement, not in any interview. He said he knows, and then he stopped talking. That decision, to claim knowledge of a motive and then protect that knowledge from public view, is either the most disciplined act of investigative restraint in this case, or it is one of the most consequential choices made by anyone connected to this investigation. Possibly both. There is no third option. What is certain is this. The people who were supposed to be the first line of response in this investigation were not the most experienced people the department had. The scene was compromised before it was finished. Evidence was delayed getting to the people best equipped to analyze it. And the person running the department says he knows why this happened but will not say. That combination of facts does not produce clarity. It produces a question that sits underneath every other question in this case. How much of what was lost in those early hours could have been the difference? Because in a case where the entire timeline rests on 41 minutes, where the suspect left a glove 2 meters from the front door, where hair was collected from inside the home, where mixed DNA was recovered and sent to the most advanced forensic laboratory in the country, every hour of delay, every mishandled procedure, every inexperienced decision made in those first critical days has a cost. And that cost is measured not in money. It is measured in time. The glove was found approximately 2 meters from Nancy Guthrie's home. DNA was extracted from it. Unknown male. No match in the national DNA database known as CODIS. Mixed DNA was recovered from inside the home itself. Also no CODIS match. Hair samples were collected and began a journey through multiple laboratories that is still not finished. No match means something specific. It does not mean the DNA is unusable. It means the person who left it behind has never had their genetic profile entered into the database. It means they have no prior record that generated a sample. It means the traditional path, collect DNA, run it against existing profiles, get a name, was not available in this case. So investigators went further. The hair sample collected from Nancy Guthrie's home was sent from the Florida laboratory to the FBI. And from there, it was directed to a forensic laboratory in San Francisco. Not a routine referral, not a standard next step in a chain of custody. A deliberate escalation to a facility that works cases the conventional system cannot solve. That San Francisco laboratory is the same facility that helped investigators identify Rex Heuermann, the man who pleaded guilty to ending the lives of 8 women on Long Island in the case known as the Gilgo Beach murders. That case had gone unsolved for over a decade. Conventional DNA testing had reached its ceiling. And then forensic genetic genealogy built a family tree from biological material left at crime scenes, traced the DNA through relatives who had submitted samples to public genealogy databases, and produced a direction that led to a name. That is what this laboratory does. It does not work standard cases. It works the cases where everything else has already been tried. The fact that it is now involved in the Nancy Guthrie investigation means one of two very specific things. Either the DNA recovered at the scene was insufficient for a direct match and required the advanced methodology to produce any usable direction at all. Or investigators already have a direction from other evidence and are using the DNA to confirm it before they move. Both of those possibilities point toward the same place. They are not guessing anymore. Retired FBI profiler Jim Clemente, in an earlier analysis of this case, argued for a single attacker. His reasoning was grounded in the blood evidence near the front porch. One person maintaining control of the entire situation. If 2 people had been present, one would have managed Nancy inside while the other handled the exit. The blood ending up on the porch pointed to a single individual managing everything alone. Steve Moore does not fully land in the same place. Statistically, he leans toward 2 people. Not because of a single piece of evidence but because of the sustained nature of what would have been required after the night itself. Holding someone, managing a situation, continuing to function while maintaining control of another person, that is difficult for one individual over any meaningful length of time. 2 people changes the operational capacity significantly. Neither investigator will put their full weight on the ice. And that level of caution from people with that level of experience means the physical evidence is not yet pointing cleanly in one direction. Which means everything depends on what the laboratory work produces. Former FBI Assistant Director John Miller offered a different lens entirely. He suggested that Nancy was identified and selected as a target specifically because of who she was connected to. Someone who lived alone, someone whose vulnerability was visible, someone whose connection to a public figure with significant resources made her a path to something larger. Savannah Guthrie said it herself. She said she fears her mother was targeted because of her own fame. And then she said something that has never left this investigation. She said it is too much to bear to think that she brought this to her mother's door. That it happened because of her. That statement is not evidence. But it reflects the direction investigators have been quietly moving. The possibility that Nancy Guthrie was not the primary target. That she was the means to reach someone else. That whoever planned this chose her deliberately, carefully, because of a connection they had studied and a vulnerability they had identified. If that is true, then the DNA in that San Francisco laboratory is not just a piece of biological evidence. It is the biological signature of someone who spent time learning about Nancy Guthrie's life before they ever appeared on that doorbell camera. Someone who knew about the pacemaker. Someone who knew about the camera's sync window. Someone who knew which doors to prop open and how long they had before the silence of that house would become impossible to explain. Forensic genetic genealogy does not give you a name immediately. It gives you a family. It traces outward from the DNA, finds relatives who have submitted samples to public genealogy databases, builds a tree, and narrows from that tree toward an individual. The process takes months. Officials connected to this case have confirmed that results from this level of testing will not arrive quickly. But when they arrive, they will not be a suggestion. They will be a direction. And directions in federal investigations that have already involved the U.S. Attorney's Office in Tucson, multiple federal agencies, and the same laboratory that broke open one of the most significant cold cases in American history, do not stay as directions for long. They become warrants. This is where everything in this investigation converges. Not into an answer, not yet, but into a shape. A recognizable, prosecutorial shape that former FBI agents recognize immediately because they have seen it before. Brian Entin has been covering this case from the beginning. He has been the reporter asking the questions that others have been slow to ask. He has been the voice pushing back against the assumption that silence equals stagnation. And on day 87, the question he is asking out loud is the same question that the architecture of this investigation has been quietly answering for weeks. Does the FBI already know who took Nancy Guthrie? Consider what is actually in motion right now. The DNA from the scene is being processed through the most advanced forensic genealogy laboratory in the country. Federal prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Tucson are already connected to this case. Multiple federal agencies are actively coordinating. Nearly 40,000 public tips have been reviewed. The reward stands at $1.1 million, a number that reflects not just hope but the serious institutional investment of people who believe this case is solvable. Steve Moore made a distinction that matters more than almost anything else said publicly about this investigation. He said there is a difference between an investigation that has gone cold and an investigation that has gone quiet. Cold means there is nothing left to follow. Quiet means there is something to protect. This investigation is quiet. The FBI's posture throughout has been the posture of an organization that is not confused. It is not the posture of investigators who are running out of leads. It is the posture of people who understand that everything they collect, every piece of evidence, every documented decision, every chain of custody, every laboratory result, has to survive a courtroom. Has to survive cross-examination. Has to be clean enough that no defense attorney can introduce enough doubt to change the outcome. Public trials, not public investigations. That framing is not a deflection. It is an explanation. The FBI is not hiding what it knows because it is embarrassed or lost. It is protecting what it knows because it intends to use it. And using evidence in a federal prosecution requires a standard of preparation that does not happen on a timeline that satisfies public curiosity. The trial for Derek Colella, the man who sent fraudulent ransom texts to the Guthrie family claiming no connection to the actual disappearance, is scheduled for June 23 at the federal courthouse in Tucson. His case is separate. He had nothing to do with what happened in that house. But his trial is a reminder that this case has already entered the federal legal system. That the infrastructure for prosecution is already in place. That the U.S. Attorney's Office in Tucson is already familiar with the names and facts of this story. That infrastructure does not get built for a case that investigators believe is going nowhere. And then there is the white car. Seen near the area, light-colored, possibly white, possibly beige, possibly something the camera's night setting rendered differently than it actually appeared. Moore said directly that he is surprised no vehicle has been publicly confirmed. He is surprised because in a neighborhood where doorbell cameras are common, where the elderly population tends to rely on home security technology, finding a vehicle that was in that area during a 41-minute window should not be impossible. Unless it has already been found. Unless investigators have had that vehicle identified since early in the case and made the decision not to release it publicly because releasing it would tell the person they are looking for exactly how close the net has gotten. Moore confirmed what every former federal agent confirms when pressed on this question. The FBI releases what needs to be released. Nothing more. They are not a media company. They meet the minimum standard of public communication and they protect everything else for the courtroom. Everything else. That phrase carries enormous weight in this investigation, because the list of things the public does not know is significant. The result of the Walmart subpoena for the backpack, the status of the vehicle, the contents of the 40,000 tips, the specific findings of the Florida laboratory before the material was transferred to the FBI, the full analysis of the mixed DNA recovered from inside the home, the result of the hair examination now being processed in San Francisco, and the motive that Sheriff Chris Nanos claimed to know early in the investigation and has never disclosed. That last one is the detail that does not let go. A sheriff who says he knows why this happened and then says nothing more is either protecting an active investigation from the kind of interference that a public disclosure would create, or he is sitting on information that, if it became public, would change the shape of this case in ways he is not prepared to manage. Neither possibility is comfortable. Both possibilities suggest that the answer to what happened to Nancy Guthrie already exists somewhere inside this investigation. Not as a theory, not as a working hypothesis. As a known fact that is being protected, developed, and prepared for the moment when it can be used where it matters most. A courtroom. On day 87, Nancy Guthrie has not been found. No suspect has been named publicly. No motive has been confirmed on record. The Bitcoin wallet that received a message on February 10th has been silent ever since. The other side never responded to the FBI's signal, and in the weeks that followed that silence, investigators have been doing what the Bureau always does in the final stages before a prosecution closes. They have been building. The DNA is at Quantico. The DNA is in San Francisco. The same laboratory that identified Rex Heuermann after a decade of silence is now processing biological evidence from the home where Nancy Guthrie was last seen. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Tucson is already part of this case. The FBI has confirmed this is headed for trial. That is not the language of uncertainty. That is the language of inevitability. Brian Entin is asking whether the FBI already knows the name. And the answer that the architecture of this investigation keeps pointing toward is not a maybe. It is not a possibly. It is a quiet, disciplined, prosecutorially careful yes that will not become public until the moment it becomes permanent. Somewhere in the space between the February 10th message that nobody answered and the laboratory results still being processed in San Francisco, the truth about what happened in that house between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning already exists. It just has not been released yet. And that is the part that sits with every person who has been following this case. Not the unanswered questions, not the frustration of 87 days without a public answer, but the possibility that the answer is already written, already documented, already preserved inside an investigation that is moving with the quiet, deliberate patience of people who know exactly where they are going. The next episode of this case will not be a press conference asking for help. It will not be a renewed call for tips or a new reward amount. It will be an arrest. And when that moment comes, every piece of silence that preceded it will suddenly make sense. The withheld vehicle, the protected motive, the FBI's measured non-answers, the Bitcoin message that was never about ransom. All of it will resolve into a single, clear picture that was being constructed the entire time, in a laboratory, in a federal office, in the careful hands of investigators who understood from the beginning that the only audience that mattered was not watching YouTube. They were sitting in a jury box. And in the next video, there is a detail about the DNA evidence in this case that has not been fully explained publicly. A specific aspect of what the San Francisco laboratory is capable of finding that goes beyond what most people understand about forensic genetic genealogy. A detail that, once you hear it, reframes what a result from that laboratory would actually mean for this investigation and how quickly everything could move once it arrives. Do not miss that one.